All right, if you would find your quadrilateral family tree, if you picked up materials, it's that really large piece of paper. If you don't have a copy of this, I have linked it in Schoology and you can print. You also can just write all these properties in your notes packet, or you could make your own, family tree kind of diagram like this. But we're going to start on the right-hand side today. And we're going to start right here in this bubble, and I would like to review parallelograms. So I'm going to write a parallelogram in this first area. Okay, and so what I want to do is list out the 5 properties. If you know it's a parallelogram, we're going to review what are those 5 properties, their theorems, what are the 5 characteristics of a parallelogram. So I want you to pause the video and see what you can come up with from memory, because this is something that we will come back to quite a bit here throughout the rest of the unit. So I want you to pause, and then when you come back, I will have the 5 written out. Okay, we have, opposite sides are parallel. Opposite sides, parallel. And you can use symbols, you can abbreviate. Opposite sides are also congruent. So I'll put the 2 sides first. Opposite sides, congruent. Okay, and then let's list the items about angles. We have opposite angles are congruent. Opposite angles, congruent. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Consecutive angles, and I'm just obviously cutting out some words, are supplementary. And diagonals are the last one. Diagonals bisect each other. Now, if you want to draw a picture, you can. But I will have us refer back to this as we proceed. So we got opposite sides parallel. We have opposite sides are congruent. And then 2 on angles. The opposite angles are congruent. The consecutive angles are supplementary, and then we have diagonals. They are bisecting each other. Now, we are going to talk about, in our section today, rhombus, square, and rectangle. So do you see how this is set up? Underneath parallelogram, I have 2 shapes, and underneath those 2 shapes, I have 1 shape. So everything under this parallelogram has all of the properties of the parallelogram. Okay, so we're going to first work with a rhombus. So in the bubble more on the right-hand side, will you add the word rhombus? Okay, and then next to rhombus, I'm gonna have rectangle. So this one will be rectangle. And then under rectangle and rhombus will be a square. Let me kind of color code here, square. Okay, so what this is saying here is that all 3 of these shapes are parallelograms. They're just more specific types of parallelograms. So a rectangle is a parallelogram with these 2 extra properties. So all 5 of these properties apply to a rectangle with the addition of the 2. So everything under on this family tree, under a shape, is the shape above it. Okay, so let's start with rhombus. So there are 3 main properties of a rhombus. First one is the definition. It has all sides are congruent, or 4 congruent sides, however you want to write that. I'll just write here, all sides congruent. So it is a parallelogram with 4 equal sides. Now we have 2 more diagonal properties. Okay, now it does have the property of the parallelogram that the diagonals are bisecting each other. They also are perpendicular. Okay, so diagonals are perpendicular. Diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, so when they intersect inside that shape, they make 4 right angles. And the other one about the diagonals is they bisect the vertices. They bisect opposite vertices. Okay, diagonals bisect, so they cut it in half. We'll just say they bisect vertices. Okay, so we'll do several examples to show that. Okay, so really, a rhombus has 8 properties because it has these 5 up here and these 3 extras. Okay, a rectangle, what makes a rectangle more specific than a parallelogram is that it has 4 right angles. 4 right angles. Okay, and then there is another property about diagonals. They are congruent to each other. Diagonals are congruent. Okay, so not only do they cut each other in half because of this property, the entire length of the diagonals are congruent. Okay, so if you have 2 diagonals, of course you're going to have 2 diagonals in your rectangle. Maybe if they're length 10, then they cut each other in half and the small segments are all length 5. Okay, so rhombus and rectangle are next to each other because they generally don't overlap. So if a rhombus has 4 right angles, then we're down to a square. If a rectangle has 4 congruent sides, then it's actually a square. So these 2 are right next to each other. Now, square is under all of this because everything above contains the properties that a square has. So I'm going to just write all of the above. All of the above. So a square has diagonals that bisect each other. I'm sorry, right over here. Diagonals that bisect each other. They're also perpendicular in the shape. They bisect the vertices. They cut the angles in half. They're also congruent. You've got 4 right angles. All the sides are equal. So everything listed above is going with a square. Okay, so I want you to think, if it's going down your family tree, means that squares are parallelograms. Squares are always rectangles. Squares are rhombus. But if you look at going up your family tree, so a rhombus is sometimes a square, but a square is always a rhombus because it's underneath it. Okay, so the shapes underneath each other contain all the properties above. All right, so we'll continue to talk more about that. So I'm going to have us switch over to our note packet, and we will just talk about these. So you might keep this paper handy in front of you.